am Donna Watts. I am a grateful recovering alcoholic. It is good to be here, and it will be better after 45 more minutes. I am grateful for the opportunity to attend this retreat, and real grateful to the committee for asking me to share. Everything that's been asked of me since I've gotten to this program has been hard, and I have balked inside, but you all taught me I had to go ahead and do it anyway, because that's the only way I'll grow. And so I'm here, and with God's help, this will get done, and hopefully I'll grow through the process. But I do want to thank the committee, because I've always heard so much about Blackstone, the history, and it being the second oldest retreat, and so many have sprung from it. And retreats and things like this are a part of my program. I started going to them early on, and they are a necessary part. For one reason, in Greenville, South Carolina, we don't have a lot of long-term sobriety to see, and I was fortunate to know one man when I came in, he had 36 years, and I got so much from that man. And so I'm just tickled to death to be around all this long-term sobriety, to see you still happy and practicing your program and living life to the fullest. I know it can be done, and that gives me hope and strength to go on and live one day at a time and hopefully get to be where you are today. If any of you are having trouble with your faith or believing in a higher power, just the simple fact that I am up here today before a group of people about to share about myself is truly a miracle, because it is beyond my capabilities. This is a prime example of God doing for me what I cannot do for myself. As you'll see as my story develops, I am incapable of this. And so maybe it'll increase your faith that we can do things with God's help no matter what we're asked to do. And this is what I have learned in this program. I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I too, like Ernie last night, am an only child, and I've come to the conclusion that's a disease all in itself. But yet I've heard too many people share that came from children homes with 2 to 12, and we all felt the same way. So I know it really doesn't matter, but it was pertinent on the way I developed. Due to being an only child, I've come to recognize that I never had the normal sibling relationships. I never learned how to take up for myself. I never learned how to interact with people. I didn't know how to be angry or express it, which I think these are just things people in families learn to do, but I never learned it. And therefore, especially with anger, it was not okay to do it. I learned very early on to stuff my anger and to stuff my feelings. And this led me to a lot of problems as I developed. Also, in my home, there was no God. I too did not come from a good Christian background. I do not exactly know why, but I do believe that part of it may have been the fact that after I was born, my mother did give birth to 3 stillborn boys. And that was the reason I resulted as an only child. And somewhere along the way, I picked up the guilt that it was my fault and that I had to make up to my parents for the loss of these boys. Like I said, I don't know how I got this, but evidently I did. And I set out expectations of myself that were impossible to fulfill. I found it imperative to be the good little girl to my parents. They needed a good little girl. Because they had these losses. And yet all the time I was trying to be a good little girl, there was all these things going on inside me that I knew I wasn't. And this lack of God in our home was quite awesome for me. Most of my childhood, I'd like to remark here, prior to the 4th grade, is mostly a blank. I had the ability, evidently, due to the pain or the displeasure or the inability to cope, to just completely block it out. But there are parts I do remember, and parts are coming back to me today. And I don't worry about it like I did at first, because I know God will reveal to me what I need to know when I need to know it. But I can remember feeling so different and so insecure because other little children had the childlike faith. They were comfortable with the Word God. They sang their little Sunday school songs. They said their prayers, and I didn't. And I was afraid of this awesome thing that other people had. And all through my life, I sought God in different ways, and I'll try to touch on some of the different ways. But I could never find the God that I understand today until I got to you people. And I will be forever grateful for you sharing your God with me until I could find the God of my understanding and see how He was working in my life. But anyway, it created an awesome fear in me and this immense inadequacy. All those other people knew something I didn't know, and they had something I didn't have, and I didn't know how to get it. And every time I'd try, I still couldn't get it. And that's an uncomfortable feeling. For those of you who did have the childlike faith, don't take it for granted. Be grateful you had it. Then, from the 4th grade through the 7th grade, I had some trauma, or what I consider now probably contributed to my already insecure, lonely life and fear of people and just overall attitude towards life. Life wasn't fair to me, I did not think. Because I hated being an only child. I really did. I would get defensive real quick because people automatically seemed to think you were spoiled. And all through my life, I went to any length to prove that I was not a spoiled only child. That was part of my people-pleasing and trying to get people to love me. I had such a big hole. But at any rate, we moved 5 times within those 2.5 years. And this, like I say, I had no roots. And my anger was building. And another thing about my parents, as I perceived it, and this I have found was one of my biggest problems throughout my whole life, is the way I perceived things. And even though I perceived them wrong, I know a lot of times they were very real to me, and I lived within these perceptions. And this led me straight to the bottle when I got to it, and I found some answers as to how to live in the way I perceived things. At any rate, they seemed to me to be a complete little unit, and I couldn't cross that line and get in there and be with them. It appeared that they did not need me. And so somewhere along the line in these 2.5 years, I decided I didn't need them. And when we finally moved to Danville, Virginia, when I was to begin the 7th grade, that's why this being in Virginia is real special to me too. But I decided that I was going to make a place for myself. I didn't need my parents, even though I still had to be the good little girl while I was at home. But when I got out and about, I changed my attitude towards life. I was going to have friends. I was going to belong. I was going to be somebody. I could not stand it the way it was anymore. And it was at this point I can pinpoint, by putting things together, that my independence and being self-sufficient appeared in my life. And this led to a lot of trouble for me later on. But at any rate, I set out to do this, and it appeared that I did it. From the 7th through the 12th grades, I was cheerleader. I was into everything. I was elected to everything. I was quite active and seemed happy, I know, for those looking at me. And probably a lot of people might have been envious of me. But see, I couldn't let them know how I really felt. I was still so empty, so scared. And it seemed no matter what I achieved or what happened in my life, it was never enough. It was just never enough. And I had trouble with people. I know today that people truly loved me and cared for me, but I could not feel it. I was not capable. My walls by this time were so thick, so afraid of being hurt, that I was not capable of feeling the love and caring that people did have for me. And it seemed like no matter what they did, it wasn't enough. My expectations, of course, were here again, getting me in trouble, and it seemed like I always wanted them to like me best. Did any of you ever feel like that? It wasn't good enough just to like me, but you had to like me best. And of course, this is impossible as I know it today, but I did not know it then. I think that's what's important. It was in high school that I found alcohol. And in my home, there was no problem with alcohol. My parents drank socially. And in fact, they had told me, Donna, if you're going to smoke or drink, do it at home. And I never did. It was like, if you've got permission, then it's no fun. But at any rate, like I say, I was still trying to be that good little girl. But boy, when I got out of the house, especially in high school, that other Donna inside cut loose. And I found that I could be that Donna, or that all those things in turmoil inside of me could come out when I found alcohol. And I was freer. It didn't really matter as much if you liked me or not. And I could say things freely. You see, I've always had trouble communicating with people due to all the insecurities and fear and just expressing my feelings in words. That's here again. Here's another part of the miracle. But alcohol allowed me to be a little better, I thought, and I felt good. But when I was doing my four-step inventory, I got my high school senior annual out to try to find out more about me as I was developing, to put my progression together. And I had thought I'd had a problem, or knew I had a problem with alcohol a few years before I got to you people. But I found out as a result of that book, having the word drunk throughout it 15 to 20 times, that's how I looked to my classmates. And they were drinking too, but I was drunk. And that was a shock to me. I really did not know, but I did discover I drank alcoholically from the very beginning. I never had one or two drinks. I always got drunk. I usually got sick. And alcohol, even early on, turned on me at a certain point in the evening. You know, I'd get that mellow and fun alcohol, and then the depressive end of it would come in, and I would wind up crying and not knowing why, because I'd just been having such a good time. So you see, alcohol affected me differently from the very beginning, and I know it was just, and I had blackouts too. I couldn't remember half of what was in that yearbook. But anyway, it must have been true. Even though I was sick in high school inside, but even though it wasn't what I wanted, which I didn't know really what I wanted, that had been the best point of my life up to that point. Well, I graduated and went to Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, and I thought I'd proceed along the same track, but it didn't work out that way. And I know today that it took me a while at Furman to find my drinking buddies. I was miserable at Furman, very unhappy for all the reasons I thought they weren't the real reasons at all. It's because I had not found people to drink with at that good Southern Baptist college. But I found them. They're there. And along about Christmas of my freshman year, I met this fella. And I later married him a year and a half later. And he was one of my avenues to finding the drinking buddies in the fraternity and that kind of life. But one of my main attractions I know today, as I learned more about myself, was that this man was a very spiritual man. And very religious man. In fact, he was doing some lay preaching on the weekends. And I know this attracted me because I had never been that close to anyone who had that kind of life and feelings about God. And so I know this was part of my hope of finding what I'd been searching for. Because in high school, I had gone to church on my own. But by this time, all these other people were way ahead of me, and that was uncomfortable. And even though I saw some people who had, what I would have liked to have had, they didn't know how to give it to me. And even if they had, I couldn't have received it. I was too far gone into my ism to receive at that point. But at any rate, this man attracted me, and like I say, we got married. And I did not graduate from Furman because my inadequacies were continuing. And here again, good little girls grew up, got married, had children, and lived happily ever after, just like Donna Reed and Father Knows Best. They definitely contributed to a lot of alcoholism in my age group watching those programs because life just wasn't that way, I found out. When I got married, You see, I never recall ever hearing my parents argue. As unreal as that seems, I may have even blocked it out or I just didn't hear it. But when the normal marriage things start happening, daily arguments or disagreements or anything, I was totally defenseless. As I told you, I didn't know how. So the only way I knew to cope was to shrink in and blame myself. And I started feeling like a failure right off. I just could not function in this relationship. And it really started going downhill from the very beginning, even though we hung in there for 7 years. I did go into training and became a cytotech, which screens pap smears for cancer. A year later, our son was born. And here again, this wasn't planned. God did for me, I know. He gave me that child because he knew I was going to need him, as you will see in my story. I was too young. I was 22 when Matt was born, and I'd never even been around babies. I did not know what to do with a baby, and I was scared of him. But I know today that the God of my understanding looks after new young mothers, drunks, and fools, and I was all of the above. But I know today I did okay, but at the time I felt like a failure. I was scared. I was frightened. Everything in my life was closing in on me. At work, I don't know whether this happened to anybody else or not, but, you know, they just wouldn't listen to me. They didn't appreciate me, and they wouldn't do things the way I thought they should be done. They would work better if they did, but they wouldn't. You know, and this was frustrating me and making me angry. The marriage was going sour. Here was this baby, you know, and you know how 2-year-olds are. They'll drive you nuts in the best of circumstances. Anyway, my alcohol consumption within while Matt was 1 and 2 started to increase, and I was forced to take a leave of absence from my job because life was closing in on me, and I was beginning daily drinking. When I took this leave of absence, I was incapable emotionally of taking care of that child. So I continued taking him to the nursery, and I drank all day long, and was really going downhill. And there's nothing worse than some of the feelings I had when I had to go to get that child at the nursery about 3 o'clock, to hold your breath to go in and get him, hoping they would not smell the alcohol on my breath. That's a very degrading and it's hard to live with. And I knew something was wrong with me. No, I knew normal people didn't do this. But I was already into the throes of my alcoholism, and shortly thereafter I wound up in Marshall Pickens, which is a place where you're emotionally disturbed in Greenville, sort of a high-class place. And I was put in for depression, but I was just dog drunk and depressed. You know, the depression that goes along with being very bad drunk. I know today that I hit an emotional alcoholic bottom at that time. Drinking was never addressed by my psychiatrist. And that place scared me enough, seeing those people in shock treatments and all that. I sobered up real quick, acted real good, and got out in a week. I didn't want to be there with those people. And it scared me enough that I knew I had to control my drinking or I would wind up back there. And like I say, my drinking was never addressed. But I continued to drink on a daily basis from that time on. And I was only 24 years old at that time, and I fully qualified for this program. But the way I look at it today, the God of my understanding wanted me to have a little more experience, strength, and hope to bring to you in this program of Alcoholics Anonymous by the time I walked through the doors when I was 37. So I had a lot more drinking to do and a lot more suffering to do before I got to you people. The marriage ended shortly thereafter in 1972. And then I was one of the first ones, it seemed, in Greenville to get divorced. It was not like it is now. A lot of people are divorced, but it was not that way. There was a stigma with being divorced at that time. And I felt guilty. I felt like a failure as a wife, a failure as a mother, a failure as a human being, because by this time I had to drink, and I knew that wasn't right. Deep down inside, I knew that wasn't right. But that's just the way it was. And so the only way I survived from then until I got to you people was with the help of alcohol and my anger and my independence and my self-sufficient nature that I had to develop keenly from that point on. Alcohol for the next 2 years was used in a way that it was emotionally and mentally necessary. I drank daily, but I drank enough to go to sleep at night and to do the necessary things for my son. There was no fun drinking at all those first 2 years, and quite lonely because there weren't that many divorced people, and I didn't have any way to meet, and I was too sick to meet anybody anyway. God was looking out after me. And Matt and I did get a good relationship going between child and mother at that time because he was my world. At any rate, you know how we do. We get these bright ideas of what's going to make us feel better. And I found this new apartment complex that had an adult section and it had a family section. And I said, well, if I move in there, Matt will have somebody to play with and I'll have somebody to play with. And that's exactly what happened. I met my drinking buddies out there. And my alcoholism progressed rapidly here because of opportunity and people to drink with. But as I look back, as you all have taught me to do, even people I was drinking with and my friends were saying, Donna, don't you think you better slow down a little bit? Just taper off a little bit. You're getting a little out of control. And I didn't understand this because they were drinking just as much as I was, just as often as I was, I thought. And yet they were telling me that I better straighten out, you know. But they saw my drinking as different even back then, and this was in 1975. Along about this time, too, I changed laboratories, and this new boss said, Donna, I don't care what hours you work, just get the job done. You shouldn't tell that to an alcoholic. So I was good, and the workload was light. So I was finishing up about 2 every day and going home. And guess what I did when I got home? I started drinking. Doesn't everybody drink when they go home? An alcoholic does. And so I did, and it wasn't long of drinking daily at 2 o'clock before it became physically necessary to have alcohol in my system by 2 o'clock every day. I did not know that then, but I know that now. I crossed over that line of needing it physically. And then my body reacted when it wasn't in my system by 2 o'clock every day. So I now had the emotional and the physical aspect as early as 1975 in my life. The control had started. But as I say, things rocked along, and this job started. You know, they didn't appreciate me either after a while. And you know, sitting behind the microscope all day just really gets tedious after a while. And I decided I needed a job in sales because I could meet people. Now, me, shy, you know, insecure, scared to death of people wanted a job in sales, but I knew this would fix me. And in 1979, I stayed with that laboratory 5 years, but in 1979, and I tried to get jobs, but the door wouldn't open. And, of course, that helped me be on the pity pot. And all through this divorce period, I was just up and down, and the downs were real low, you know, shutting myself in the house when Matt was at his father's and not coming out again till Monday morning, staying drunk, passing out, that lonely drinking. And then, on the other hand, I'd take a surge and go out to the bars, or I'd go to parties. You know, I was on a merry-go-round, up and down, all kinds of drinking. I've drank every way there is. And done all the things that go along with it. But in 1979, that laboratory changed management. And this new boss had the audacity to expect me to work till 5 o'clock. And I told him I couldn't, with all my good reasons. And he they kept insisting. And I tried it a few days, and I absolutely could not work till 5 o'clock. So I went to him, and I said, well, you know my position. If you would fire me so I can collect unemployment, I'd appreciate it. And they did. I really didn't think they would. But they did. And so here I am unemployed with Matt and me and my booze. But it was all justified in my mind. That was part of my insanity. All of this was justified. And so I just drank all day and was real angry due to my justifications. But God did look out after me, and 3 months later I got a job in pharmaceutical sales. Now, I thought I had arrived. I conned my way into that job. You're supposed to have a college degree, but I conned my way into it. And threw myself into it. But here again, my alcoholic thinking was working. I said to myself in my best thinking that you don't want to do too much the first year so that you can have room for improvement the second year and the third year, you know. And so guess where I was at 2 o'clock every day? I had done enough, and I was home drinking. So, you know, alcohol was definitely in control of my life, even at that point. But I was still functioning. Being a functioning drunk kept me out there a long time. And it's also dawned on me recently that not having a mate kept me out there a long time. That was my enabler, just being single. I didn't have to answer to anybody. It was my life, and I'd do with it what I pleased, and I wasn't hurting anyone, and nobody could tell me what to do because I was self-sufficient, and I didn't need any help from anybody and wouldn't take any help from anybody. You know, when Matt and I started out back in 1972, we had $100 to our name, and that's a scary place to be. And so this anger and me and Matt against the world attitude is what kept me alive till I got to you people. And the help of booze. I'm very grateful for alcohol for helping keep me alive to get to you people. Even though it almost killed me at certain times, it kept me alive at certain times and existing. Because I didn't live before I got to this program. I existed. And I don't ever want to just exist again. I can't handle it. But at any rate, after a couple of years in this job, what I know today was happening is it was time to start doing more. And I couldn't. I knew I couldn't deep down. And I started getting that paranoia to creep in around 1980. That they were going to find out that I wasn't doing all I was supposed to do and that I was home drinking by 2 o'clock every day. And that real fear, terror started setting in. And I got disillusioned with the job. You know, here again, they weren't appreciating me. You know, I don't know why we all get that attitude. When we know we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing anyway. But I think that's part of the alcoholic thinking. But at any rate, the next 2 years were completely downhill, and I was on a fast track. Drinking had started taking on the aspect of being very unpredictable. When I could take 3 drinks sometimes and be dog drunk, or I could drink all night and never get high. You know, I never knew what was going to happen, and after I did, you know, it was just unpredictable. The blackouts were worse. I was doing things I really didn't remember and getting more and more embarrassed. I was starting to really embarrass my son by this time because he was 12 at that time. And life was starting to really close in on me. I had to have alcohol sooner than 2 o'clock. It started progressing earlier and earlier during the day. I started telling myself if I had a good call at 9 o'clock, then that was enough for that day. If I had a bad call, then the rest of the day was going to be bad, so I went home and drank. If it was raining, doctors don't want to see you when it's raining. If it was pretty, it was too pretty to work. You know, this was the way I was starting to live, and it was because I needed the alcohol more on a daily basis. My system, from the time I was 24 till 37, there was never a day without alcohol in my system. I even had 3 surgeries, and people brought me booze to the hospital. You know, I just never went without alcohol. And I never even tried to quit. I kept hearing when I got here, you know, I could quit 3 months or 6 months. You know, and I never tried because I knew I couldn't. Alcohol was necessary, and I wasn't about to try not to do without it. I tried every way this book describes to change it and to alter it, but I never tried to quit. I think I knew deep down I could not live without alcohol. At any rate, my bottom started, the very bottom started in the spring of 1982. My ex-husband came to me, and my son had been to him in tears about my drinking and the way our life was getting. And this scared me, folks, because Matt was my life. He was the only reason I was living, really. He was what made me jerk up my bootstraps and trudge on to whatever was next. And the thought of losing him scared me because I knew I would die. And so I knew my drinking, I had to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And so I went to my medical doctor and got a little honest about how much I was drinking. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll put you in the hospital and dry you out under your colon problems, and we'll see if you're an alcoholic. Well, I went in on Sunday night, dead drunk, got out on Thursday morning. I didn't go into DTs in those little 3.5 days or hallucinate, and he came in and said, Donna, I don't believe you're an alcoholic. I said, I don't either. It was just what I wanted to hear. He says, I think if you just control this thing, you'll be all right. And I said, I think you're right. And I bet I controlled it 2 days. And I was so sick by this time, there was no control in my life. After the control, I tried controlling it, and I saw I wasn't controlling it. And I was getting desperate because I didn't know what I was going to do. And some days I didn't really care if I lived or not. I was to that point I didn't know whether I wanted to live. But I didn't want to put the burden of suicide on Matt. I'd heard what that could do to a child. And I really did not want to do that because, you see, he was the only thing I could feel any love from my whole life. So I went to John Smith, whom I had been seeing. He was a chaplain at the hospital, and I had been seeing John off and on since 1968 when Matt was born. And John knows about alcoholism and has worked with alcoholics all of his career. And he knew way back there that I was an alcoholic, but he knew better than to push me. And he said, Donna, you ready to, you've got 2 choices. As I see it, you can either go into treatment or are you ready to talk to somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, well, I won't go to treatment because I would lose my job. And I finally agreed that I would talk to somebody in AA. So in early June, this girl met me for lunch and brought me some pamphlets, and I'll be forever grateful for those pamphlets because I went home and read them and started that initial identification. And she wanted me to go to a meeting or offered to take me to a meeting that night. I said, no, thank you, I'll meet you there. I wasn't about to let anybody pick me up. I was too independent and too proud. But I did meet her at that night, that Saturday night at that meeting, and I know I was at the first meeting I was supposed to be at. There was a lady up at the podium sharing her story, and out in the audience was her 9-year-old son. And the honesty she was saying, I don't know what I heard, but I heard enough to be totally amazed that that woman was saying what she was saying with her son sitting out in the audience. Now, that's all I comprehended that night, but that was enough. That's what I needed to see that night. And so I know God got me to the meeting I was supposed to be at. She met me at 3 more meetings the following 3 nights. And the funny thing about that weekend, now this is insane, folks, if it's ever alcoholic insanity. I wasn't drinking that weekend. I was pouring amaretto into a jigger and sticking my tongue down in it. And I was not drinking. I wasn't drinking my wine or my vodka, In my mind, I was totally convinced I wasn't drinking. And I asked Rebecca on the way in that Sunday night, I says, does doing that amaretto count? And she said, yeah, I think it does. So that's where my mind was, so y'all can imagine how much I comprehended in those 4 meetings. But I did do one right thing. I bought this book, and I'll be forever grateful. And if I ever have anything to do with the newcomer at their first meeting, I make sure they have a book when they leave, because that may be the only meeting they make for a while. And it was so important to me, as you'll see. I had a company meeting that Wednesday night in July, and I could not make it, in June, and I could not make it through that without drinking because I was so scared. And I had heard enough that I thought I probably belonged where I was those 4 nights. But the thoughts of that company finding out that I'd even gone to those meetings, I knew I'd be fired. And I was petrified and scared, and I had to drink. And I drank for 6 more weeks. I tried to control it, and of course that wasn't working, and sometimes it was. But the one thing I did, I started reading in this book. And I'm glad I was as sick as I was, because I read chapters 2, 3, and 4 over and over and over. I didn't go straight through the 165 pages, and I'm grateful I didn't. But I guess I was searching, and I was seeing enough in this book to not be able to deny that I was in this book and that I was probably an alcoholic. But I didn't want to be an alcoholic. My final bottom came the weekend before July 28th. I was in a blackout that day. I'd taken Matt to his father's for the night, and I mentally and emotionally gave Matt to his father, knowing he would be better off. And to me, that was giving up. But I came to the next day, felt awful, and a friend of mine reconstructed that day, and it was a real nasty day for her. And I knew something was getting ready to happen, and I didn't know what. I finally made it to Greenwood that night, because that's where I was supposed to be in my work, and you have to turn in a motel receipt. So I got there by 5, and I went and got me a bottle of wine and went to the room. And I started drinking, and the most awful thing happened. Nothing happened. Alcohol did absolutely nothing for me. And I knew it was over. And that is the worst feeling I think I've ever had in my life, is when alcohol did nothing, and that I knew it was over, and that I didn't know what I was going to do. Because I knew I couldn't live without it. I could not imagine life without it. So I got back home to Greenville the next day, and I called John, and he said, "Donna, you've got to go to a meeting tonight." I think he knew I would have drank if I had not gone. So I balked, but I went. But I did not pick up a white chip that night. I was too sick, and I was incapable of making that decision. I was too confused. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I went the next night on Wednesday, July 28, 1982, and I picked up a white chip, and I have not found it necessary to take a drink since that time. That doesn't mean it's been easy or that I didn't want to drink, especially that first year. I balked at everything there was to balk at in this program and did a lot of things wrong. But through God's grace, I made it through those times when I probably should have drank. The thing was, I didn't want to stop drinking, but I knew I had to do something. I stayed sober those first 30 days out of pure fear. I was detoxing myself. I was so nervous. My skin was crawling. I was coming inside out. I was pacing, and I couldn't ask anybody for help. Can y'all imagine that? I would go to a meeting and leave. I was too scared. In discussion meetings, when it come around my term, I choked on the word alcoholic. I could barely get it out, and I whispered it. I was too scared of people. I didn't want to be an alcoholic, but I thought I should say it because deep down I knew it was. But that didn't mean I was happy about it. I know I went to meetings. I don't know how many that first 30 days, but obviously enough. I don't know what I heard, but I heard enough to stay sober, and perhaps in the combination with that grace period that I believe all of us are given by God when we cannot do anything for ourselves and He keeps us sober. And it's strictly the gift and by the grace of God. And I am so grateful for that feeling as you all taught me to look back and see how that was the beginning of my seeing that God was working in my life, was those first days I stayed sober. Because I didn't know what was going on. I was too foggy. I barely remember picking up my 30-day chip. And the 3-month chip, like I say, it's all a fog, but I do know that I had trouble finding a sponsor. I kept hearing, you got to get a sponsor. And, in Greenville, just the short time I've been here, and believe me, it's a short time. I'm just a baby in this program. There weren't very many women in Greenville with any sobriety that were still active. And, of course, there were no professional single-parent women like me. I was different. That was my excuse. They wouldn't understand. I know y'all have never heard that before. But at any rate, I was appointed this lady for a temporary sponsor, and I would have died before I'd asked her anything or called her. She'd call me, but I wouldn't call her. But at any rate, I did enough of the right things, whatever they were, and they were the simple tools that I could comprehend at that time. And they are the basis of my program today, those simple tools I learned in the very beginning. I still do them today because they work, and I'm not about to forget a one of them. I've added a lot of tools to it, but I don't forget my simple tools that kept me sober the first 3 months of this program. At any rate, I did finally find sponsors, and they walked me through these steps as best they could. I did another thing that I kept hearing you shouldn't do, but here again I was different. I got sort of involved. I think it would be better to call it an entanglement. But see, mine was different, and it really wasn't that serious. And it really wasn't, but it was serious enough to endanger my sobriety, believe me. But it was what I had to learn. It was what I had to learn from me. See, I've been told all my life I was a stubborn individual, and that didn't go away when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. But at any rate, this guy got drunk on Thanksgiving after I came in July. And I'm be forever grateful for his drunk. And he since came back and has almost 5 years sobriety too. But at any rate, what it did for me was to show me how cunning, baffling, and powerful this disease was. I'd been hearing it, but I saw it. I came to believe everything I had heard in meetings, the yets. I came to believe the concepts of this program. I came to believe that you all were telling me the truth. And I came to believe that I would drink again if I did not get serious and get into this program of recovery. I had been staying sober, I know today, on step 1 and the fellowship. But I had to, and it was at this turning point that I really entered step 2 and started coming to believe, first in you all and later in the God of my understanding. And I'll be forever grateful for that turning point. And I think we all have to come to it, because it was there I gave that commitment. And across that invisible line of wanting to stay sober more than I wanted to drink. Because you see, up to that time, it was still an option in the back of my mind. But at that point, it no longer remained an option, because I knew I would die or go insane. And along with this commitment came the desire to live. And I knew you could teach me how to live. And I didn't know it. I hoped it. I didn't know it yet. That took a little more time before I came to know that. At any rate, I did, like I say, find some sponsors, and I'll be ever grateful for them and their patience with me, because I all of a sudden became a question box. I wanted to know it all. And I kept them up late at night, and I'd call them on the phone. I really made a turning point, and I'm grateful. Things went along, and got my first blue chip, and I used to sit out in this audience in your seats and say, I'd never have to do what I'm doing up here, because I didn't have a story. I said, well, at least I'll never have to do that. And I was a year sober before I really realized that I did have a what it was like, what happened. And I was just starting to enter the what it was like now. I was still mostly in what happened. But I could see it was evolving, and that was because some changes inside had taken place. One of the other turning points within that first year it's very important to me is, after balking at the 4th and 5th step so long, I finally had to do it like we all do if we're going to stay sober. And I was in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I was either 7 or 8 months sober, somewhere in there. And I finished it up. When that pen's going to fly that last time, it's going to fly. I don't care where you are, what you're doing, it's going to come out. And I finished up at 7 o'clock, and my home group was meeting that night in Greenville, an hour away. And I knew I had to be at that meeting that night. That new feeling inside had come over me. And all the way down that mountain is where I can pinpoint now that I was starting to feel that new attitude and outlook on life. It was the beginning. And then that just keeps increasing as I grow in sobriety and in life. And so then things as this program, if you're going to grow, it's a program of change. And I'm not good with change. I don't know any of us that are. But I know it's necessary. If I'm going to stay active in Alcoholics Anonymous, I must be willing to change and be willing to go to any length to obtain that change. And I today am more willing than I ever have been, and I know that will increase if I stay around. But because it's just part of the program for me. I don't know what's good for me. God does have a plan for me, and I must be willing to go along with it, whatever it is. And the next few things sort of illustrate the God of my understanding and how He works in my life and how this program works in my life and how important you people are in my life if I'm going to live. Along about 18 months sober in the spring. I hate the spring. It's not a good time of year for me. It seems to be a growth time. My ex-husband came to me, and he and my son had gotten together, and my son was 16 at this time. And they'd kind of gotten the idea that it might be nice if Matt went to live with him for the last 2 years of high school. And this threw me because, Matt had been the center of my life. And even though sobriety by now was number one in my life, Matt was right in there at number 2. But he was also at the top of my drunk list, which I was told to make when I got into this program. My emotions involved with him were at the top of my drunk list. But my immediate reaction was, no way. But I got to thinking about it and praying about it and really searching my soul about it. And you see, Matt had been denied his father's love most of his life. And because his father never really showed an interest. And here was an opportunity, I came to see it as, for father and son to have a relationship. And Matt was insecure because he did not know his father's love or know really deep down that his father loved him. He knew I loved him, and he was proud of Punches Me in Alcoholics Anonymous and that I was straightening my life out. But he still had that need, and I searched my soul, and I balked, and I screamed, and I prayed. But I knew deep down it was God's will. I finally came to that conclusion, and I knew I had to do God's will if I wanted to stay sober, because I had committed to that when I knew. Most of the times I don't know, but somehow I knew this was God's will, or that I better let it evolve as it would, but I better give Him the opportunity to find out if it was God's will. And so I learned through that process, and the process continued after Matt went to live with his father, the process of letting go and letting God. Today in my life, there's a difference to me between letting something go and turning it over to God as I understand Him. I had to let go of my alcoholism and my alcohol, and it was a long process and painful. Letting go of Matt was a long process and painful. But the rewards are in the end. A lot of things on a daily basis I turn over to God, and I have the option of taking them back. But the things I have let go of to the God of my understanding, I do not have the option of taking back. And to me, that's a big difference in my life today. It's true commitment to the God of my understanding. And by going through these two big things, increased my faith, just thousandfold. God was working in my life. I could see it, I could feel it, and I knew it. And but it's only because you all had shown me how He worked in your life that I could look at it and feel it in my life. Then this relationship with Sterling had started evolving, and that was tough for me, because you see, these 12 long divorced years, I wasn't too good at relationships. Booze interfered, and my independence and self-sufficiency and my fear, all my defects interfered with the relationship. And it was scary for me, but because of God, this program of recovery, the 12 steps, and sobriety being number one in each of our lives, we decided to take that risk and get married and make that commitment. And it's been a good marriage. We've been married a little over 3 years now. But I contribute our happiness and the success so far to our sobriety remaining first. You see, we're at different places in our program. I'm only at 5 years and he's at 14 years, and we have different needs, and we have to do different things in order to grow where we are. And we're willing for each other to grow. And it's the best freedom not to be jealous or envious or hurt when my mate has to go and do what he has to do in order to grow and be happy and continue his contact with the God of his understanding. And that's a gift of this program and a gift of God. And God is in the middle of our relationship. We try to keep him there. The only time we get in trouble is when two good alcoholic minds have the same good idea. Now that's when we are in trouble. That's when we have to go around talking to the other people we know in the program, because our good idea, that's dangerous. It's dangerous, the way we think. But at any rate, you know, I kind of felt like God had taken, or Matt was out of my life on a daily basis. And it really didn't turn. I'd like to interject at this point. Matt and I have the most beautiful relationship today. He's a college sophomore, happy as a pig in a rug, totally well adjusted, and he and I have more freedom in our relationship because of this program and our freedom from alcohol. And it's just a real good feeling. And I didn't lose him, I gained him. I know that saying of let it go, if it's meant to be, it will come back, and it comes back tenfold. And I believe that because it has happened for me. But at any rate, I sort of, you know, it was tough. Like I say, I accepted this through the process, but it didn't mean that it didn't have a lot of pain and that it was easy. But it happened because of what you all had taught me to do. Well, it seems like that, and when I got married, you know, I didn't have to work anymore. And I'd worked for 20 years. I didn't know anything but working. And so it was an adjustment not to work, what to do with my time. Well, God took care of it. As I told you, there wasn't many women in Greenville at that time. And all of a sudden, he opened the gates, and they came flooding in Greenville. All these women. And they needed people to work with them. And I wasn't working. I was available. We've since gotten a lot of daytime meetings started in Greenville, and the nighttime meetings have increased. You know, our fellowship in Greenville has grown tremendously since I came in just 5 short years ago. And I wasn't ready to work with people, just like I wasn't ready for anything that's happened to me in this program. I didn't think. But God usually knows better, and he started sending newcomers my way and to work with. And I will say that I've learned a lot about myself and about others and about this program by working with people. To me, there's no substitute for it, just like there's no substitute for meetings. There's just no substitute for certain things in this program for me. And sometimes the hardest things are the most rewarding, the toughest things. And working with other people is tough for me. Because I told you I had trouble communicating. Well, you have to communicate if you're going to work with people. And I didn't feel like I knew anything at 2 years, and I didn't. Only what had happened to me and for me. But I did believe in the program. And they have ultimately taught me more about myself. And I have grown to know more about myself and be more comfortable with myself as a result of working with them. And most of them are still sober today. Some of them are celebrating 3 years this year. And that's a good feeling to have watched their lives turn around and to see them as enthusiastic as all of us here today are about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I must close with, this brings me, there's so many more things I could say about what this program has given to me, but what I am about to close with, even though it's hard, it gives the best illustration of the total program of Alcoholics Anonymous today, how it works in my life and your life. One of the first lady who came and asked me to work with her. And it scared me to death, and I told her I didn't know how, but that I would try, and she didn't know how to be a pigeon either, so we worked out pretty good. And she was, another thing I've learned about people and working with people is, God is in charge of who we work with. If I think I can help somebody, it does not work. I tried it, it doesn't work. God, if I just let God put the people in my path that are supposed to be there, it works out. And I'm learning that slowly. I still have to learn it a lot, but I'm learning it. I'm making progress. But at any rate, Norma Rose asked me to be her sponsor, and I reluctantly said yes. And we learned together. And here again, it's an example. If you'd have picked out two more opposite people on this whole earth, it would have been me, Norma Rose. She was a tavern drinker. She was loud. She had no problem with words. And God, I loved her. And like I say, physically we were totally two opposite people whose paths never would have crossed. And we came to love each other with the love that you all know that come between two people in this program. This past February, we lost Norma in an automobile accident. And she died instantly, which I am grateful for today. But as you all taught me, the painful experiences I must grow from and learn from. And as I look back on, I'm still evaluating and I'm still learning, but I have learned a few things up to this point about all this. And one of the things that I look back and my immediate reaction was, no, it's not true. And I was on the way to the hospital emergency room. We had to tell her daughter, who is also a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that her mother was dead. And I didn't want to believe it, but you all, through the process of these 12 steps in this recovery program, had taught me not to ask why, but to start working on acceptance. And I think that's what I did automatically. I didn't ask God why. I just said, help me, God, to get through this, whatever I'm supposed to do. And for the next 3 days, God carried us all in that community, because losing Norma Rose was a great loss. And she only had 2.5 years in this program, but Norma Rose's life had turned completely 180 degrees around. She had come in, like I say, a tavern drinker and a sewing room operator. The day she died, she was getting ready to be manager of an apartment complex and had gotten a degree from Greenville Tech. She had a God of her understanding, and she was feeling the best about herself that she had ever felt in her life. And this is comforting to me in my loss for Norma Rose, because I ask myself, what more can I ask out of life than how she felt that day that she was taken from us? And I know, because I helped Norma Rose, that she read every morning and prayed every morning. And I know that she had turned her life and her will over to God that morning. And that brings me comfort, because I know she's okay. And, it also brings home to me that I don't tell everybody I love them, or that I don't tell them enough, or how deeply, or I don't show them. It brought home that reality, I don't even have this 24 hours. I have right now, this minute. And I must make the best of it. These are some of the things that this experience has brought home to me. But working with Norma Rose increased my faith so much because of the tough times she went through. She had this program, folks. She had it, and she loved it. And she's here with us today. And that's why I say none of us ever die in this program. What was passed on to us, we pass on to others. And I would like to describe her funeral, because to me it is the example of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the love and the compassion and the enormity and the unexplainable things that happen to us. The funeral was held at where our home group meets. the church turned the whole thing over to us. There was not one member of their church there. They just turned it over to Alcoholics Anonymous. There was standing room only in that church. There were about 300 people. 2.5 years before that, there would not have been 5 people at Norma Rose's funeral, and those people just would have been there out of family and obligation. But that many people loved that woman, and she had touched that many lives and more lives if they could have been there from out of town. 2.5 short years this happened because of this program. The person conducting the service is a recovering alcoholic who used to be a minister. The man who sang is a recovering alcoholic, and the girl who played the piano was a recovering alcoholic. Norma Rose had won at one of our dances at the Alano Club a funeral plot a year earlier. And this cemetery is owned by an alcoholic in this program in Greenville. Her grave was dug by a recovering alcoholic who works for this cemetery. The funeral procession was one of the longest ever, they said. They told us later. Going to put her in her final burial. And the pallbearers, I think this is where it's at. The pallbearers ranged from a man who spent 28 years in the penitentiary to a man who's probably a millionaire anyway, he's wealthy, and everything in between. It's an example of our lives never would have crossed if it was not for our alcoholism and to getting to this program. And that all of that disappears. It's the love and our common bond that is the difference. And those were her pallbearers, and that, my friends, I believe, is the love and the dedication. And, you know, at the funeral home, they asked us, you know, I was sort of like family, and I didn't feel out of place because I was family to Norma Rose. They said, who was that woman? Who is this woman? Was that woman? And you know who she was, folks? She was an active, sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful talk, Lord, and so good.